Before I write this, a quick note on sourcing. The reference script contains several claims I can't verify, and that look fabricated or exaggerated. A specific minimum wage lawsuit with dollar figures, a 2015 employee misconduct lawsuit, and a DUI arrest for Buddy's brother-in-law Maurizio Belgiovine. I couldn't confirm any of these through reliable sources, so I've left them out rather than repeat unverified claims about real people. I've kept the verified elements. Buddy's own 2014 DUI plea, Remy Gonzalez's sexual assault conviction, his mother Mary's 2017 death from ALS, his 2020 hand injury, and the show's actual trajectory. It wasn't canceled outright in 2017. It went on hiatus, moved to Discovery Family in 2019, and quietly ended in 2020, and corrected the timeline accordingly. Here's the script. For a decade, television audiences fell in love with a small Italian bakery in Hoboken, New Jersey, and the loud, funny, hard-working family who ran it. Cake Boss turned sugar and fondant into appointment viewing, made a local baker into a household name, and built one of TLC's most enduring hits. But the story didn't end the way most fans think it did. There was no dramatic finale, no press release announcing cancellation. Instead, the show slipped away slowly, worn down by tragedy, controversy, and the simple passage of time. To understand how Cake Boss rose so high and faded so quietly, you have to start with the man at its center. Bartolo Buddy Valastro Jr. was born on March 3, 1977, in Hoboken, New Jersey, the youngest of 5 children and the only son. His father, Bartolo Sr., had bought a small bakery on Washington Street back in 1964, a shop that had actually been founded decades earlier by an Italian immigrant named Carlo Guastafaro. Buddy grew up in that bakery. By the time he was 11 years old, he was already working alongside his father, learning the rhythms of dough and sugar the way other kids learned to ride a bike. It wasn't a hobby. It was the family business, and everyone was expected to pull their weight. Then, in 1994, tragedy struck. Bartolo Sr. died, and 17-year-old Buddy suddenly found himself responsible for running Carlo's bakery. He hadn't finished growing up yet, and now he was in charge of a business, a staff, and a family legacy. His mother, Mary Valastro, stepped in to help hold things together, and under her steady hand and Buddy's stubborn determination, the bakery didn't just survive. It grew. Buddy pushed the shop beyond traditional Italian pastries and into elaborate, sculptural specialty cakes, the kind of show-stopping creations that could anchor a wedding or a milestone birthday. Word spread. Brides started requesting Carlo's cakes specifically. Buddy began entering Food Network cake competitions, and even though he lost his first 3, he eventually took the top prize in a Battle of the Brides challenge. That exposure planted an idea in his head. What if people could watch this happen in real time? He pitched a reality show built around daily life at the bakery, capturing the chaos of custom orders, the family bickering, and the artistry behind the cakes. TLC picked it up, and Cake Boss premiered in April 2009. It was an immediate hit. Viewers couldn't get enough of Buddy's exuberant personality, the tight-knit and occasionally combustible Valastro clan, and the sheer audacity of the cakes themselves. This wasn't birthday cake with a few flowers territory. Buddy and his team built cakes the size of small cars, cakes shaped like motorcycles, cakes with moving parts and pyrotechnics. A 7,000-pound Bumblebee Transformers cake. A cake modeled after a NASA space shuttle. A life-size piano you could actually sit down and play, if pianos were made of sponge cake and buttercream. The show made the improbable feel routine, and audiences tuned in every week to see what impossible thing Buddy would attempt next. Part of the show's charm was its supporting cast, and Cake Boss never pretended the bakery was anything other than a family operation. Buddy's sisters and their husbands were woven into nearly every episode. Grace Fogno, the oldest sister, worked the front counter and later took on decorating duties, while her husband Joey Fogno served as head baker, responsible for keeping the bakery's classic recipes consistent even as Buddy's ambitions grew wilder. Maddalena Castano managed the counter as well, married to Mauro Castano, the shop's pastry chef, who had emigrated from Italy as a young child and eventually became one of Buddy's most trusted collaborators. Mary Cyrone worked as the bakery's cake consultant, meeting with customers to plan their orders, and Lisa Valastro, the youngest sister, ran the storefront and handled billing. Beyond the family, longtime employees like Frankie Amato, a cake decorator and Buddy's cousin, and Danny Dragone, a jack-of-all-trades who'd worked at the shop since before Buddy was even born, rounded out a cast that felt less like co-workers and more like an extended, slightly chaotic household. Not every storyline was lighthearted. In 2010, Lisa's husband at the time, Remigio Remy Gonzalez, who had worked as Buddy's left-hand man at the bakery, was arrested and charged with sexually assaulting a 13-year-old girl. He pleaded guilty and in 2012 was sentenced to 9 years in state prison. He left the show immediately after his arrest, and Lisa and Remy later divorced. It remains one of the darkest chapters in the show's history, a reminder that even a program built around cheerful family drama couldn't insulate itself from real-world consequences. The show's popularity kept climbing regardless, and TLC did what networks do with a hit. It multiplied it. Next Great Baker launched as a competition series in which Buddy searched for a new apprentice. Kitchen Boss gave Buddy his own daily cooking show built around family recipes. Bakery Boss and later Bake You Rich attempted to extend the brand further, with mixed success. Meanwhile, Carlo's Bakery itself transformed from a single Hoboken storefront into a genuine tourist destination, with fans driving hours just to buy a cannoli that had appeared on their television screen. Buddy published cookbooks, appeared in bridal magazines, and became something of an ambassador for Italian-American baking traditions. For a while, it seemed like there was no ceiling. But television, like sugar, has a way of eventually reaching its melting point. By the mid-2010s, cracks were beginning to show. The reality television landscape had gotten crowded, and Cake Boss was no longer a novelty. Newer competition shows and a flood of copycat baking programs meant Buddy and his cakes had real competition for eyeballs. Then, in November 2014, Buddy's public image took a real hit. He was arrested in Manhattan and charged with driving while intoxicated. The case drew national media attention, precisely because it clashed so sharply with the wholesome, family-first image the show had spent years building. Buddy eventually pleaded guilty to the DWI charge, and while he addressed it publicly and moved forward, the incident chipped away at the squeaky clean brand that had made Cake Boss so marketable in the first place. Still, the show pushed on. It was renewed for additional seasons in January 2015, and production continued through 2017. But that year brought the blow that actually reshaped everything. Buddy's mother, Mary, had been quietly battling amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, since 2012, a diagnosis that had been kept largely private even as her health visibly declined on camera in earlier seasons. On June 22, 2017, Mary passed away. She had been the emotional center of the family and in many ways of the show itself, the person who had helped a grieving 17-year-old hold a bakery together decades earlier. Her loss devastated Buddy. In interviews afterward, he admitted he couldn't even bring himself to return to the Hoboken shop, saying it held too much of her memory. He stepped away from filming, and Cake Boss went dark. What followed wasn't a cancellation, so much as a long, uncertain pause. For 2 years, there was no new Cake Boss on television. When the show finally returned in 2019, it wasn't on TLC anymore. It resurfaced on Discovery Family, a smaller sister network with a more child-friendly programming slant, confusingly labeled as a new Season 9 even though, by the original numbering, it was really Season 14. The move signaled something clear. Cake Boss was no longer TLC's flagship attraction. It was being repositioned, quietly, to a channel with a fraction of the audience. New episodes continued for a little while longer, but the show that returned wasn't quite the cultural force it had been a decade earlier. It aired its final episodes in 2020, and while there was no formal farewell special or dramatic send-off, Cake Boss simply stopped producing new installments after that year. To this day, many casual fans still assume it was canceled outright back in 2017, when in truth its ending was more of a gradual fade than a hard stop. Buddy's personal life brought one more dramatic turn before the decade was out. In September 2020, while at his home bowling alley, his right dominant hand was impaled by a malfunctioning pin-setter machine. It was a horrifying injury for anyone, let alone a man whose entire livelihood depended on the dexterity of his hands. His sons and other family members had to cut him free from the machine, and he underwent multiple emergency surgeries in the aftermath. For a time, Buddy publicly wondered whether he would ever regain the fine motor skill needed to decorate cakes at his old level. Remarkably, he made a strong recovery, and by late 2023, he reported having regained roughly 95% of the strength in his hand. It was, by any measure, a frightening chapter, but also one that underscored how much of his identity and career had always been tied to those hands and what they could build out of sugar and cake. Looking back, no single scandal killed Cake Boss. It was closer to a slow accumulation of factors, a television landscape that had moved on to fresher formats,